Is it mid-September and too late for an August wrap-up? Yes. Do I care? No. Howdy and welcome to my channel. You know, it is so satisfying to have a great reading month after being in a reading slump. So I'm so excited that I have so many great books to report that I read in August. So for the first book I read, or listened to I should say, was The Sun Does Shine, How I Found Life and Freedom on Death Row by Anthony Ray Hinton. So this is a memoir about Anthony Ray Hinton's experience living for almost 40 years on death row. This is the first memoir that I've actually willingly read and sought out, and I thought it was incredible. Definitely one of the best books I've read this year. I already made a separate video doing an in-depth review, so go check that out if you want more detail. But long story short, I thought this book was incredibly well written and powerful, not only describing one man's experience on death row, but also explaining the racial inequities and systematic biases in the American criminal justice system. And it was also a very emotionally charged book. And so I think listening to the audiobook really heightened the reading experience. So in a completely different tone, the next book I read was The Subtweet by Vivek Shreya, which is about two Indian Canadian musicians as they navigate the trickiness of social media and female friendships and what it really means to be an original. So our two leading ladies, Neela and Rukmini, are both musicians and they become friends, bonding over music and whatnot. But Rukmini all of a sudden becomes super famous because Rukmini, she's had a lot of followers on social media, and so she's gotten a lot of notoriety because of that. But she's a cover artist versus Neela. She's an original artist, so she thinks of herself differently, but she doesn't have nearly as big of a following or fandom as Rukmini does. Anyways, Rukmini gets incredibly famous at one point in the book, and there's one misplaced subtweet that happens and that spirals their entire relationship out of control. So this was a very light and easy to read novel, but I think it got at a lot of interesting themes in a really approachable and a relatable way. Both Neela and Rukmini have their own hang-ups and jealousy over the other's musical talents, and a lot of self-doubt that they don't communicate, which I think is something a lot of people can relate to when they're talking about navigating friendship. And the book also talks about what it's like to be a brown woman, musician, especially in a really white dominated space, and navigating tokenism and white liberalism and what it means to lose your authenticity and pander to white audiences, and just considering all of these things when it comes to being a creator of color. And so much of this book focuses on communicating through social media and different digital spaces and all the anxiety and layers that can exist in a single text or a single tweet, but it does this in a really non-boomer way. So it's really obvious that this book was written by someone who understands social media and uses social media, and not in
boo, the internet is bad. Back in my day, people used to talk at each other. What's a tweet?
So it talks about social media in a way that's actually representative of social media. One last thing, I really appreciated that while Rukmini, as one of the main characters, she is a trans woman, but her whole story and her identity in this book doesn't revolve around her transness. There's nothing wrong with, stories that are specifically about what it's like being trans or struggles relating to gender identity, but I thought it was just really refreshing that she was able to exist as a woman who was trans, but this book focused on a different part of her identity, which was her music. Next, I read Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno Garcia, which is set in 1920s Mexico, and it's about a girl, Cassiopeia, who inadvertently resurrects a Mayan god of the underworld. And she goes on a quest with him, traveling all throughout the Yucatan Peninsula, trying to restore him to his full power and glory. One of the highlights of this book, I really enjoyed Cassiopeia's character. She goes through so much growth throughout the story, because at the beginning she's treated so much like a servant. under the shoe of her family who treat her so poorly. But she has like these huge aspirations of like what she wants to do and what she wants to like where she wants to travel and like the person she wants to be, but she doesn't necessarily have the confidence or the means to go through with any of these plans. But as she travels with like Hunkame, I hope I pronounced that correctly. She just grows into herself so much and becomes so much more assured in her own decisions and like confident in fulfilling her dreams and desires. And I also really just like the relationship between her and Hunkame and how they like pine but also just become so much more comfortable with each other over this whole journey. But the real underrated character, the shining star of this story is the train. Because listen, I miss traveling so much, and these two were traveling all over Mexico. God, I wish that was me, and I really just felt transported into the story. Sylvia Moreno Garcia's writing is so rich and like beautifully illustrative, and I think she like perfectly captured the different personalities that each city has, and just capturing like the beauty of like traveling, adventure, and like seeing the world all just through the vibe of the jazz age. And so it was really nice to read. Like it was just like really great to read the story because her writing was so good. You know, I wish I was on a train. One more thing, like there's already so many books out there about Western mythology, like, and I really like getting some insight into Mayan mythology. All right, so I know there's already a million booktube videos about Six of Crows, but you know what? I totally get the hype because wow, Six of Crows was so good. If you're not familiar with Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo, it is about this gang of teenagers who are contracted to go through with this like prison break heist to essentially stop and destroy an object of biochemical warfare. You know, just hanging out with the boys. Am I right? But I loved it, and you know, I'm not like familiar with the Grishaverse at all, so I really appreciated that I could read this as a standalone novel. Yeah, so like the first 100-something pages of this book are kind of slow because that's when they're like planning the heist and you're like getting introduced to all the characters and whatnot. But once the heist starts, boy oh boy does it start. And I typically like don't care for books about the teens, but these kids are just so like cynical. They act like war-hardened 30-year-olds, and you really forget that most of them are like in the 17-18 age range. While the action of this book is really exciting and well written, what really sold me were the characters. Like they all start off begrudgingly, like kind of sort of tolerating each other, but by the end they all like each other and kind of trust each other, and dare I say they're a found family. But despite, you know, how much like they grow to trust each other throughout the book, despite all that, they all still have their own motivations and agendas for heisting, and those all have the potential and almost do derail the whole operation. Because like the day before they're all set to break in, Kaz, the leader, is like, yeah, we should all have this finished in a day, and then we're gonna be on our way and we're gonna get all the money and it's gonna be great.
Are you sure about that?
There were like 200 pages left at that point, dude. So I didn't really think it was gonna go down like that. Despite the fact that they're all like kinda assholes and that they are all extremely chaotic, by the time I finished the book, I had adopted 6 new children. Shout out to my girl Inej. I love her and I would absolutely die for her. Yeah, I don't know if this has come across, but I love this book and I've already gotten Crooked Kingdom, so I'm really looking forward to reading that as well. So continuing with my Percy Jackson reread that I started a couple months ago, I also read The Sea of Monsters by Rick Riordan this month. So I made a separate video reviewing this book as part of my buddy read with the Anonymous Bibliomaniac. But what else can I say? Like, I had a really good time rereading this book. It was very nostalgic, and just in general, I'm looking forward to finishing the PGO series with the remaining 3 books because I really liked those as a kid and I'm seeming to really like them again as an adult. And the last book I read in August was The Bird King by G. Willow Wilson. This is set in like the 1490s during the time of the Spanish Inquisition, and the book is catapulted by the end of the Moorish Empire that comes with the fall of Granada. And so our story follows our two characters, Fatima, who was a concubine for the Sultan, and Hassan, who was a royal cartographer, but he has like this ability to draw maps and doors to places he's never been, which, side note, as someone who enjoys making maps for fun, like I wish I could do that. Like, can you imagine how amazing it would be to just like draw a map of anywhere and that place just becomes a reality? The raw power of that is too incredible. Anyways, so we follow these two characters as they escape Granada and try to find safety despite being hunted by inquisitors. And their goal is to make it to the island of the Bird King, which is a supposedly fictional island, so they can be safe, because as Muslims, they know that they're never going to be welcome or safe in a Catholic Europe, especially one being led by Spain. So first and foremost, I gotta give props to my main man Hassan, because he is so horny. Like, it is established that he always had men in and out of his room while they were at the palace, which is, you know, fine and all, because he was like the royal map maker. He was living it up. He was allowed to live it up. But when he and Fatima are escaping, they're being assisted by this jinn named Vikram, and they're literally like on the run for their lives and like not sure if they're gonna live or die. And Hassan is like, you know, Vikram, a wolf man, he might be a vampire, but is for sure tasty. Or like when he and Fatima steal this boat and then they kidnap this priest, he's like, listen, Gwennick, he may be a clergyman, but what if... So, you know, I gotta recognize him. Anyways, the best things about this book were for sure the writing and the characters. G. Willow Wilson's writing was just so poetic and beautiful, and this was reflected not only in how she wrote like the world and the like traveling and everything, but also the relationships. Like, I really loved Hassan and Fatima's friendship. It was just so tender, and you could really tell that these two characters knew each other so well and cared for each other so much. Like, they'd be having an argument, but also just let all that baggage go if they knew the other like really needed them in that moment. And I think, you know, that makes their friendship like really realistic, because yeah, they do fight and they like do like call each other out over like their flaws and like get mad at each other, but they also love each other so much and like can't imagine life without one another. Also, just another thing about the writing, like this book heavily uses magical realism, so if that's like, you know, the type of writing that you enjoy, I think you would also really like this book. But, you know, all of the good things being said, I think the plotting was probably like the worst thing about this book. It was really slow, and I got confused, like lost in a lot of the action scenes, and like the final battle felt pretty anticlimactic. And so just like the last 100 pages of the book, I was pretty confused as to like what was going on, which was frustrating, because this was like the moment the characters finally achieved their goal of getting to the island, so I like wanted to know what was happening. So those were all of the books I read in August. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these or are thinking about reading any of these books. But thanks so much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye.